Once, I left the land of denial, and I faced the abuse from my past, and I admitted it to others. I was ready for the next step. I was given an assignment to assess the damage, to find out what was stolen from me, to calculate the debt that was owed to me. After I knew what was taken, I could then grieve over the losses and hand them over to the good God that cares about my broken heart. But this was a difficult task. For me, I had just barely admitted what my past was, and now my counselor wanted me to think about it some more and figure out what was owed to me. Oh, it seemed too big a task and one that was far too emotional. But God came through again, and He gave me a new picture, a new story, and in writing this, I discovered all that was taken and all that had been returned to me on this journey. Part 1 of the tale of Tabitha Turtle. Deep in the forest, next to the babbling brook, lived a small family of turtles. One day, when the sun was shining down on the earth, the crickets chirped their songs of delight, and a slight breeze was flowing through the trees. The youngest member of this family was hatched into the world. This little turtle's name was Tabitha. Tabitha was just an ordinary turtle with a typical dome shell that protected her from harm. This hard shell had a patchwork of simple colors ranging from browns and reds to yellows. Its pattern of circles and squares created a design unique and special to her. Each section of her shell represented a facet of the things that would protect her throughout her life. The first thing Tabitha became aware of was that she had no father. Oh, she was sure she had one somewhere, but he seemed to have wandered off and left her alone with just the females in her family. It wasn't long before she realized that there was something else missing too. There, on the right side, just above her shoulder, was a hole in her prized shell. It was as if her father had taken with him a piece of her sense of belonging. This left Tabitha with a small ache in her heart. However, it was just one small chink, and she was sure she would be fine without it, since she was well protected under the rest of the armor she wore on her back. Days went by, and as Tabitha grew stronger, she made daily trips to the brook to gather food and water for her family. On these visits, she would see other turtles, and some would say hi to her, while others wouldn't even acknowledge her existence. She watched as the other mother turtles would lovingly plod down to the brook beside their young. She often wondered in her head why her mother never made these trips with her. She also observed how these mother turtles would watch over their young, nudging them with their heads when their offspring stayed too long in the water. Tabitha began to wonder if there was something wrong with her, because her own mother never drew close to her, never nudged her like she'd seen the other turtles do. Each night, she would inspect her little shell to make sure she looked just like the others. And one evening, she noticed another portion of her protection was missing. Affection is gone now. Instead of just having one hole to protect, she now had two. This concerned Tabitha a little, but she knew the rest of her shell was still there, so she assumed she would be just fine. Tabitha, not enjoying the time spent with her distant mother, would toddle over to see her grandmother, the oldest member in her turtle family. Grandmother certainly paid more attention to her than her mother did. Sometimes, her grandmother would even accompany Tabitha on her trips to the brook. Tabitha liked the attention she received, but was startled one night to find that another chink of her shell was gone. Boundaries were missing. Now, who had taken that piece of her shell away? Why would anyone try to destroy the only thing she possessed that would protect her from the outside intruders? She was now missing 3 small sections of her precious shell, and fearing the loss of more, thought she should mention this to her mother. She approached her one day, walking slower than usual, afraid of what her mother's reaction would be. When she opened her mouth to speak, her mother pulled in her head and feet, withdrawing into her own shell, and went to sleep right in front of Tabitha. She knew she'd better not disturb her mother, so she wandered off a little and bedded down for the night. In the morning, she noticed that next to the missing chink, where boundaries used to be, was a new missing piece: her voice. Little Tabitha let the tears slide down her face. What would she ever do if she lost any more of her shell? One day, The day arrived when Tabitha was old enough to venture farther from home. She was going on an outing with all the other young turtles. She got ready, she waved goodbye to her mother and grandmother, and then she started out on this hike to the other side of the brook. She was very excited. Finally, a chance to see what else lay beyond her small home. They hadn't traveled far, though, when Tabitha saw a big winged creature in the sky. She'd never seen anything so beautiful before. What was it? She wondered. She started to walk over to one of the turtles when she noticed that all of them had hidden themselves under some bushes. She was left all alone standing in the middle of the path, and that thing was heading directly toward her. She figured out too late that it wasn't friendly, so the only thing left for her to do was to retreat inside her shell. She laid there trembling as she felt the impact of its feet landing on her back. She heard a pecking and felt a painful chipping at her shell, and then all was quiet. When Tabitha was sure that the creature was gone, she slowly poked her head out of her shell and, sure enough, discovered another piece of her armor was missing. She was to find out that it was a bird that had carried away with it her self-esteem. Once Tabitha got home from this horrible outing, she curled up inside her shell and cried herself to sleep. When morning came, she searched for her mother and grandmother and came to the sad realization that they had both gone away. They were not there to wake her up. They were not there for her to talk with. In fact, they had left her and taken with them another piece of her shell, love. For what seemed like days, Tabitha retreated back into her shell and cried. She knew not what to do. She knew not where to go. Poor little Tabitha. While Tabitha hid in her shell, the other young turtles received word from the lion. He was the king who ruled and reigned over the forest and all of the woodland creatures, and he was calling all those who would come to meet with him. He intended to give each a purpose and a direction in their lives. And when Tabitha finally opened her eyes and poked her head out of her shell, she discovered that all of the other turtles had left her behind and she was all alone. Tabitha looked around in all directions, but not a soul was there to give her the message from the lion or to keep her company. She remained in that same spot for a few moments and then decided she'd better try to find the others. She set out, walking along the banks of the brook, hoping she would see some sign of her kind. It wasn't long before the sun went down and the darkness descended upon her, causing her to tremble with fear. She had never been out this late alone before. Finding the nearest tree to take shelter under, she was just about to slip into her shell for the night when she heard a twig snap. She looked around and caught a glimpse of the strangest creature. It was hard to see because the creature was black and seemed to blend into the night sky. The only visible marking was a white stripe down its back. The stranger snuck up to Tabitha and introduced himself as Shady Skunk. Tabitha told Shady Skunk that she was looking for her family. He offered to help her look for them, so she invited him to stay with her till morning, at which time they could begin their search together. She wasn't as sad that night as she went to sleep in her shell. With Shady Skunk curled up beside her, she felt safe. Unfortunately, when she awoke the next morning, Shady Skunk was gone, and so was another chink in her shell. Shady Skunk had taken with him her self-confidence. She would not be able to rely on her own judgment after last night. It had cost her too much and left her all the more vulnerable. So once again, Tabitha set off, walking beside the brook, which soon became a stream that flowed ever faster the further she traveled. She had to make sure that she didn't fall in or she would surely drown. She trembled with each step she took and wondered how she would ever be able to take care of herself. Her little shell that once covered her body was now half gone. So much had been stripped away by those whom she had relied on that she wondered if she would be able to survive. But instead of giving up, she kept on walking, for there was nothing else to do. She couldn't go back to her empty nest or wander farther from this stream because she would die without water. All she knew to do was put one foot in front of the other, and that is what she did. Each night she would try as best she could to curl up under what remained of her shell. Each morning she would slowly stretch her legs and neck, and then the day's trek would begin. The scenery changed a little from time to time. Some places had more trees than others.